the Middle podcast, the podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, slackers, and welcome to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I am your host, Jason Eck, and this week is all about things that are funny. I like funny. I think we all like funny. And I think that our generation has a particularly, shall we say, dark sense of humor. We certainly have talked about movies from our generation before on the podcast and the things that I guess you could say are black comedies, dark comedies. Now, that's not completely unique to Gen X per se. Certainly the later boomers, I think, have that sensibility. But all throughout, time, all I guess, eras of film and music, there's always been gallows humor. So I don't want to say that it's unique to us. I just think that we have a particular style that, given the uncertain times that we live in, we've seen kind of at least recently, it seems, a kind of concerted effort on the part of the stand-up comic community to really, I guess, coalesce, come together, and create spaces where the purpose of comedy has always been to hold a mirror up to society, right? Which means that there's very few things that are off limits. And I think that when you start to get offended by comedy, where you're looking to break down stereotypes, sometimes by going directly at them, I think that's always been effective. And we're not talking, again, just, Gen X, but imagine someone like a Pryor coming along in this era. Certainly people have talked about and these are not my words, but, the problematic bits of Eddie Murphy from, shows like Raw and Delirious. But I do think that at this point, there's at least a solid handful of comics, both, I guess, established and up and coming, that have really embraced this whole, why can't we push the limits of good taste? And I think that's what good comedy is. You're pushing the limits of good taste. And I'm going to kind of give you a very loose, in no particular order, kind of my favorite comedians, comics, stand-up comics of Generation X. And we have some absolute legends. Now, I'm going to say right out of the gate, there are going to be some people on here that you're going to go, depending on your own proclivities and what you find funny, you're going to go, no, that dude's offensive. Probably. But I'm also going to share some of my own experiences of seeing at least, let's see, on this list, I haven't gotten to see, many of them live. I've seen a handful of good stand-up shows. Now, a couple of them are people that I can't include on the list because they're not Gen X. One is not on my list of, core. Actually, let me double check the age of that one person. Because I spent good money to go and see a show. And unfortunately, the person is not really all that funny nowadays, which is kind of a bummer. Oh, excuse me. Okay, cough count, number 1. Dodged a bullet there. Not a Gen Xer, on the cusp. And I have done no one cusp. I have gone Social Security Index, Gen X numbers. It is 1965 on, I think it's 1977 or 78 by that metric. I have stayed within the confines purely of those demarcations. So let's jump in and go through what I would consider to be my loose, I'm not going to call them my exact top 10. Well, no, they're my top 10, but they're not in a particular order. I'm not going like 1 through 10. I'm kind of going to mix it up a little bit because I'm looking at my list and I'm going, have I actually categorized these? And I haven't, but I am also going to put it out there that there is only one female comic on the list. And that is just because I guess my own maybe ignorance, perhaps, or maybe just the kind of humor that I have. But when I mention who it is, if you're familiar with her stand-up comedy, you're going to be like, oh, I get it. I absolutely get it. So let's just jump into this. Let's just start off right out of the gate with the oldest guy on the list. The oldest guy on the list, who is arguably probably one of like the greatest of all time, which is why this is not in any particular order. But even if someone is the greatest of all time, if they're not my favorite, I wouldn't place him at number one just because. We're talking about 1965, coming right out of the gate. One of the funniest and probably most influential stand-up comics of our entire generation. And I'm talking about Mr. Chris Rock. Now, of course, he has been in the news over the past couple of years, the last year, I guess, for all the wrong reasons. And think about why the situation occurred, rightly or wrongly. Okay, so this is not a referendum on Will Smith and the feelings that he was having at that particular time. Obviously, we've learned a lot about Will and Jada's relationship. Whole nother thing going on there. There's a lot of psychology that you got to dig in over there. But Chris Rock has always been a button-pushing comic. And no one was spared. Now, obviously, a lot of his humor has been racially based. And in fact, he's gotten himself into hot water of people of all colors from some of the bits that he has done. He's gotten himself in trouble across lines of misogyny, let alone racism, right? But his delivery, his cadence, his setup, and then when he gets rolling, like he'll talk fast, but yet he punctuates and breaks up the bits, even when he's going rapid fire in such a way that you catch everything. So I was watching some clips earlier, and like one of the first ones is he decides that he is going to literally divide his crowd. This is one of his earlier specials. And he just flat out comes right out and says, so who lies more, men or women? And it's just now divided the whole crowd. And then he gets into this whole bit about men lie more often, women's lies are bigger, right? And he's like, a guy lies, it's like, I was over at Kenny's house, and he's lying. A woman's lie is, I'm pregnant and it's your baby. The whole crowd laughing, booing, cheering, just chaos, and just masterfully pulling them all in to the bit. Just a master at work, like so ridiculously good. Yeah, I mean, it is hard to go wrong with Chris Rock. I mean, any of his specials. And honestly, I haven't watched the most recent special, the one that came after what happened with Will Smith, but I definitely have to check it out. I heard he did some great stuff. Now, one of his frequent compadres, as well as a former castmate on Saturday Night Live, we have a guy that is either adored or loathed. And I don't really feel like there's a lot of middle ground here. And I'm talking about 1966, the birth of one Adam Sandler. Now, what I think with Adam Sandler is that he has always leaned into the jester role, if you will, right? Play the dummy, probably one of the most brilliant people, truly, right? An understanding of business, of film, but structuring a joke, structuring skits. I'm sorry, Billy Madison is a classic. Those first few, that Happy Gilmore, Happy Gilmore might be better than Billy Madison, honestly. But you start to see like kind of how his brain works. But you go back and you watch his very earliest stand-up, and he is like this nervous teenager, not figuratively. I'm not saying he's like a nervous teenager. I mean, he's actually a nervous teenager, teens, early 20s, and completely not self-assured. And he's building these jokes and they're self-deprecating, but he does this whole bit. Now, his segue between jokes wasn't great. It was very abrupt. It was like, first it was a very grounded joke, and then he just goes into the absurdist. And he says that he has a like 6 or 8 inch sized Elvis living in his refrigerator, and he steals his lettuce because he's cheap. Like, that's the setup. He goes from, so Elvis is alive and well, and he's living in my refrigerator. You know how he does the voice, right? And he says, thankfully, the Chuck wagon, remember the Chuck wagon commercials and the little covered wagon and the horses come out of the wall, Chuck wagon? And he says he put some hay bales in the corner of his kitchen so that it would distract the horses pulling the Chuck wagon. And when the horses pulled over, he had a little mini guillotine that he had set up, which chopped off the head of the horse. Sorry, we all have a cold now. It's not just me. Everyone has been sniffling, sneezing. Anyway, he chops the head off this horse. So he takes the little horse head, places it in the bed with little mini Elvis. So when he wakes up, he sees it, Godfather style, and says, "You better buy your own lettuce." Like, it's ridiculous. Ridiculous joke. But even then, as a kid, you saw this really weird sense of humor that was still obviously in its very formative stages. What an absurd joke. But it's like, there it is. There's Adam Sandler. And obviously he's gone on to do like great work. I haven't seen, was it the Righteous Gemstones? Is that a different movie or something? Whatever that movie is that he got all these accolades for. I've seen Punch Drunk Love, but I've also seen him do kind of dramedies. Like, there's a whole section of like Spanglish that's very moving. So he is a very talented actor. Just everyone knows him as the buffoon. But I mean, he's a legend, honestly. I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to do these in age order. So next, 1968 and Gone far too soon. We have literally the inimitable, no one else has ever had this style, Mitch Hedberg. I think, of course, the most famous joke, which is, I used to do drugs. I still do, but I used to too. It's ridiculous. His whole thing on belts and the belt loops. Who is the real hero? An escalator can never be broken. It can only be stairs. The one-liners and the non sequiturs and the no need for a particular segue. It's just joke after joke. And I would say rapid fire, but he also took his time with it. And I think that's what was so clever, because his delivery was so unorthodox. Just absolutely so unorthodox. Like even just going to the deli. God, there's a million bits. But if you haven't watched Mitch Hedberg, go watch some of his stuff. Even if you're just driving in the car, all of his albums are available on Apple Music or Spotify, whatever it is. You can just listen to it. Sometimes if I don't have any podcasts available to listen to, or I'm not really interested in listening to music, I'll put on a comedy record, and Mitch Hedberg is right at the top of the list. I mean, obviously, drugs and alcohol, major problem. And it's just so unfortunate because he would have been huge. He would have been huge. He'd have been doing all the big Netflix specials. Like it was inevitable. And in fact, actually, one of his albums, the crowd was awful. Like he was working hard to get these people. It's like, why did you go to this show? Like, did you not know who he was? Like normally people go to a special, like specifically to see like the featured artist. And it's like they didn't get it. He had to work so hard to get them. But absolutely, Mitch Hedberg, legend. So now, as I mentioned, there's only one female comic on the list. But oh my gosh. I can't remember the first time I saw her. Yeah, I really don't recall, but 1970, Maria Bamford. Just as much as I talked about Mitch Hedberg being a completely unique voice, she was and is literally unique voices. And this vocal range from, because you come out and you start talking like this, really soft and like sweet. And then she's like, literally. You know, a whole thing on like stealing someone's leftover Easter candy. You waited too long. I've eaten it. But then like she'll do like these great Midwestern voices because she's from Minnesota. She has a lot of voiceover work, but her sense of humor is just out there. And she'll be the first one to tell you because part of her, like she did a autobiography, and she talks about dealing with significant mental health issues, and even as like a kid, like major anxiety, depressive, like all this kind of stuff, and how she's channeled it into her comedy is amazing, absolutely amazing. A lot of like physical comedy, facial comedy can really change her face, in a way that someone like a Jim Carrey can, by the way. Oh, Jim Carrey. Not on my list. I think he's a boomer. Let's double check it just so I know. Boomer. Not on the list. But in some ways, she's like a female Jim Carrey, except not as like spastic energy. Like she kind of stays very like rooted, like at the microphone, but man, she is so freaking good. So if you've never seen Maria Bamford, check it out. She might be like the most representative Gen Xer. Honestly, like I feel like her sensibilities captures my own sensibility, my own idea of humor. Just a legend. And not enough people know who she is. Like comedy legend, and like other comics will tell you how good she is, but yeah, not well enough known. Like she should be a household name. So now, 1971, a guy I couldn't leave off the list because he legitimately makes me laugh. While at the same time, like his joke construction isn't great. Now, who am I to judge? Right? Who the fuck are you? Right? Bobby Lee, formerly of Mad TV, has a couple of podcasts, can do dramatic work extremely well. But holy shit, like his whole thing is, a lot of stereotype humor, a lot of very sexual humor. He's a guy who's also been in, I say quote unquote trouble because he's had a proclivity for public nudity. But a lot of it is like his family and like growing up, like so American, like he's so American, but his parents are immigrants. So it's like living that my family is very Korean. I'm very American, but of both worlds. And the stuff that he does is just so funny. But like I said, a lot of really raunchy sexual humor, constantly push buttons about his own sexuality, the things that he has done and experiences that he's had. But Bobby Lee, really, really good. But like I said, it's not even about the jokes. It's about the delivery, where I think oftentimes it's a combination of both. You have to have great material along with a great delivery. Sometimes a great delivery can really make up for even, I'm not saying it's mid, like actual material. It's not. It's just that you have some folks on this list who are like joke writers, like really constructing, sometimes even long form jokes that have slow, long burn to get to. Bobby's just out there swinging and throwing anything up there, anything, and see what sticks. And I kind of appreciate that kind of courage, just go out there and see what sticks. So also 1971. And acquired taste, I think, for some. I also don't think as mainstream famous as perhaps he should be. Again, I think language usage, easier for me to say, language usage might be part of it. I don't know. Says some things that people might scratch their heads at, or mainstream audiences, particular mainstream white audiences, might be uncomfortable with. But Cat Williams, 1971. Cat Williams is a performer. So very quickly, like what we're talking about Adam Sandler, right? I didn't even mention the fact that like he does music, right? So he does skits, even in his stand-up, he does music. Cat Williams will like do dances and lip syncs and like performances. Like you don't go and have a guy who's just standing there with a microphone and a stool and a bottle of water. Now he has a stool and a bottle of water, but he also has like a full set, music. Like it's a show. Like you're getting a full show. Gosh, I'm forgetting the song. I want to say it was like Lil Wayne song or something like that. He does this whole routine, but he has this one bit that he does that I just watched recently where he's like, to my black friends, except he says other words for that, get yourself some white friends, because like, basically he's like, if you get arrested and you call one of your black friends, they're going to interrogate you as much as the cops. Where you been? Who you with? How come you didn't invite me? Like all these different things. Like, what did you do? And he goes, your white friends will be like, I'll be right there before the phone is even hung up. And they're like, how dare you? What did he do? Like completely at your defense, drop everything. It's just a funny bit. He's like, so black people, get yourself some white friends. I don't know. It's a funny bit. I'm probably not doing justice to like his catalog of stuff. He has way better jokes. My gosh, there's one that he's like riding around the stage on the stool, like just crazy physical humor. Like by the end, I mean, he's just dripping in sweat, like giving the crowd everything that he has. And his cadence and delivery, once again, like he has a unique voice and his phrasing of things. Because he's also, I think, is he Southern? Let's see here. I just spelled his name horribly wrong. How did I manage that? He's not Southern. He's from Cincinnati, Ohio. I would not think of that as interesting. Get this. I haven't been doing bios for people. He emancipated himself from his parents at the age of 13, moved to Florida, and supported himself as a street vendor. What? Holy cow. That is a crazy thing. He has one biological son and 7 adopted children. This is fascinating. I did not know that. Emancipated at 13. Like what was his life like if a judge granted emancipation at that age? Holy cow. Anyway, I guess the moral of the story that continues to always be is you have to be able to laugh about things. And we all know that humor is perhaps the most obvious defense mechanism. Wow, 13. Like, I understand that people, when they get emancipated, like 16, you know what I mean? But man, that's young. That is really young. I'm gonna have to do some more research into him because that's a hell of a story. All right. So now, in 1972, this brings us to the Machine, Bert Kreischer. Now, I think with Bert, and I think it's probably unfair because he does a lot of good bits, but the Machine, however much is embellished, what's real, what's not, doesn't matter because he sells it. Absolutely sells it. I haven't watched the movie, which is like supposed to be like semi-autobiographical. It is him. He learned Russian in college, ended up going to Russia, and perhaps possibly involved in a train heist with some Russian gangsters. And because of his proclivity and continued proclivity and appetite for alcohol, it's kind of a whole thing. He helps rob a train. Bert is legitimately funny. Delivery, again, like, and he kind of got, I think, his big break relatively late. When you look at it in a comparison of like some guys who, you know, I mean, I think he's really only been well known, I don't even think 20 years. When did The Machine come out? Whoa. I accidentally did something to my computer. I am still somewhat struggling here with the very odd change in my setup down here. Bert Kreischer. When did that start? So his most popular story is how he allegedly earned a nickname, The Machine. Like a lot of these guys, by the way, are also doing podcasts. Let's see. Where are his specials? Comfortably Dumb, and then The Machine. So The Machine. So 2016. So we're looking at really having a big break in his 40s. You know what I mean? Because he's 50 now. So that's just, you know, you got to work and work and work is what it comes down to. His first special was Comfortably Dumb was 2009. So I don't know. Let's see. When did he first get started? It doesn't really say. But 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, so in 2004, he had his first feature along with 4 other comics, National Lampoon Live, New Faces Volume 2. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it is a grind. Oh my gosh. In 1997, he was featured in an article in Rolling Stone magazine while attending Florida State University. The magazine named Kreischer the top partier at the #1 party school in the country. Oh my gosh. The article also served as inspiration for the 2002 film National Lampoon's Van Wilder. Holy shit, that is a crazy story. So anyway, if you don't know who I'm talking about, you got to check out Bert Kreischer. Funny dude. Absolutely funny dude. So also born in 1972. Here's where we get to one of the Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting into my natural top three anyway, because now we're talking about potentially the three most offensive comics of our generation. Potentially. Now, I didn't get into some of the guys who have passed away. So let's just check one name here. I'm going to check a couple of ages real quick. He'd have been on the list. I did mention, obviously, Mitch Hedberg, who had passed away. There's really no one like him. Oh, that's a tough one because he was really good too. Okay, we're gonna just do a quick segue here. So before we get into this top three, two guys that I guess I'm going to call some honorable mentions. So the first one is Greg Giraldo. Now, Greg Giraldo was a lawyer. He got his Juris Doctorate from Harvard. He did his undergrad at Columbia, right? Giraldo was admitted to Harvard Law School after achieving a near-perfect score on his law school admissions test, his LSAT, scoring in the 99th percentile of students taking the test. Like, think about this. Brilliant. He worked for 8 months as an associate for Skadden, Arp, Slate, Meagher, and Flom before just saying, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to be a stand-up comic. I think, he was perhaps best known for doing the roasts, but he also did a lot of self-deprecating humor as well. But, yeah, I mean, he was on Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn. Oh, shit, I didn't even mention Colin Quinn. Is Colin Quinn Gen X? No, he's not. He's a boomer. Okay. Colin's old. Holy cow. Anyway, but I mean, Giraldo, his wit was caustic and biting. And I think what's so tragic is he also had a family and completely admitted that he had a drug problem. He overdosed on September 25th, 2010 at the age of 44. I mean, with the way that I think social media, your YouTubes and I mean, left 3 kids behind. The way Instagram and like every platform now, Twitter, aka X, like if you're a comic, you can go like straight to your audience. And I think a guy like Giraldo could have been huge at this point. Wow, 2010. Damn. But also dying at the age of 41 and far too soon. But unfortunately, this was a case of health issues. Patrice O'Neal. Now, also Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn, did a lot of radio. Just a consummate comic. Do you know what I mean? Like studied comedy, like talked comedy, would go on shows where they discussed comedy. And of course, he was raised in Roxbury. I say, of course, because I lived in Roxbury. Yeah, I mean, another guy who I think that other comics looked at and says, this guy takes it so seriously and is cautious about how a joke is framed, set up, the words that are used. Like he would change words because he's, always thinking about like, how do I really deliver this joke? And I think he is a absolute, like he's the inspiration for a lot of guys. But I think one of the cool things, it says here, O'Neal cited George Carlin and Richard Pryor as his favorite comedians. I mean, hell yeah. His comedy has been described as conversational. Absolutely. His routines were characterized by an off-the-cuff approach and frequently adult themes. He was direct when presenting his views, particularly on race and gender roles. He was also a provocateur who often incited audience members to heckle or even leave the club. George Opie Hughes stated that he had seen O'Neill give people money to leave. You're not happy? Get out of here. Go. Get out of here. Yeah. But he had a stroke related to type 2 diabetes. I mean, he called his fiance and said, it's bad. I can't move my legs. And, he'd had a blood clot. He lost the ability to speak and later his ability to move, communicating for a time by eye movements before losing this ability. He said he would likely remain paralyzed and unable to speak if he survived. And complications from that stroke ultimately killed him. Guy was so good. But then I'm like looking through the list of like people who had attended his funeral. And I am seeing like a number of other comics that I wouldn't put in my top 10. So we'll come back to that in just a minute. But I really felt like Greg Giraldo and Patrice O'Neill like naturally deserve to be talked about because just their influence and their legacy in comedy. So now getting back to the big three of offensive comics. Now I say offensive, one of them you're going to be like, not necessarily offensive, right? It's hard to say. I guess it all stems from your own perspective, but I'll get into that a little bit. So this first guy is a British comic born in 1972. He is a prolific host of a myriad of different comedy-related shows over in England, particularly comedy game shows. A guy who has recently taken a lot of flack, of which he does not care. And I'm talking about Jimmy Carr. Now, Jimmy Carr can be, if you are sensitive to certain things, highly offensive, without a doubt. Like, I totally get it. I even understand why people are offended. I do. But I've watched his bits and talk about things that if you were to say to me as someone like in conversation, right, about certain topics, I could see myself being offended. Now, not much offends me. There are certain, I don't want to say third rails because I'm just not that person, but things that would definitely bother me, right? Jimmy Carr could make jokes about those same kind of topics and I'd laugh because it's all about intent and how it's framed. And when you can see that little glint in someone's eye where you know they're not just like taking the piss out of someone, they're not punching down as many have said that comics are sometimes doing. I don't think that's the case. I think he punches at everything, up, down, sideways, all over the place. Nothing is off limits. And one of the other comics we'll talk about actually mentioned that in their stand-up set. So Jimmy Carr has made some jokes about World War II, Nazi jokes. He got in some heat about some gypsy jokes. He talks about morbid things. Grotesquely sexual things. He does push every possible button and does it with this shit-eating grin and his laugh, which is it's like Desi Arnaz, but like British. Do you know what I mean? And again, I get it, but I think he's so clever. Now, in the same way where I talked about like Mitch Hedberg being like just punchline after punchline, you can call them like the one-liner kind of comics or very minimal setup. Jimmy Carr is very much like that. It is punchline after punchline after punchline. Not a lot of long setups, typically. Now, it doesn't mean that he hasn't done long setups in certain like spots in the show, but when he's just rolling punchline after punchline after punchline. Now, he was asked, gosh, this was probably 10, 15 years ago. He was on a comedy roundtable with Paul Provenza. He has this show, and comics will get in and talk about comedy. Patrice O'Neill was on that show. In the episode that he was on, they asked him, what's the most offensive joke that you've ever told? And he says that if we could only provide mosquito nets or something like that in Africa, we could prevent the needless spread of AIDS to like mosquitoes or something like that. Like just, it was the exact twist on what you'd expect, right? Saying that, really it's not about the people getting AIDS. It's preventing, how do you say it? Needless prevention, something of mosquitoes from AIDS. And the whole place was kind of like, what? And he goes, ha, ha, ha. And they asked him, hey, what is your most offensive joke? And I don't even know, honestly, if that's his most offensive joke. So if you find that offensive, bear in mind, he's told worse jokes, in my opinion. But that must have been one of those ones that got a rise out of people. But again, if you're listening to this show, chances are you're Gen X. That's that kind of dark shit that, like, I think we find funny, or at least I do. So next, we have the guy who, if I was purely ranking it, if I was going to poll, like, 30 comedians, probably 29 out of 30 are going to say this guy's the best. The absolute best. And he pushes buttons. The guy is, I think, somewhat legendary, if for no other reason that he walked away from fame for a time. Was in the midst of being a superstar and said, not going to do it anymore. Dave Chappelle, born in 1973, had the Chappelle Show, sketch comedy, some groundbreaking, sketch comedy, which shouldn't be possible, right? After all those decades of your SCTVs and your Saturday Night Lives, your Mad TVs, Chappelle Show was something else. And as a comic, he is constantly producing new content. And I don't have a guy on here that I would have thought I would have captured on the list, and I forgot to. But Joe Rogan, also a stand-up in my estimation, Joe Rogan's a very good stand-up. Some people say he's not a good stand-up. He is. He's great, actually. But he said that the difference between Chappelle and other guys is that Chappelle will go to like a random club because he's just driving through, like going somewhere else. He'll stop in and like do a set. One, that's great for like the people who are there, where Dave Chappelle just shows up at your club, but he also wants to do the work. Like he'll have an idea and he'll just go and do it, see if it works. So imagine you're in some tiny club somewhere. Dave Chappelle comes in, does new material. He's workshopping it, kills, and next thing you know, it's on a special. Amazing. Now, there's a story that's told, and a guy that I don't find super funny, so he's not on the list. Again, Rogan and a couple other comics were on Rogan's show, and they said that basically Dave Chappelle ruined Dane Cook. Now, Dane Cook's okay, right? His whole shtick, whatever. 50-some odd years old, he's marrying a 26-year-old. They've long-term relationship, okay. But apparently he was at a comedy club, and it was supposed to be Dane Cook's big night. He was going to be the headliner. And the owner of the club was like, so Dave, tonight's Dane's night. Tonight is Dane's night. I'm going to make sure he looks like $1 million. So just do your, 7-10 minutes, whatever. He was like a feature or whatever. And then he's the headliner. Like, let this guy get his shit in. Like, it's his deal. So Chappelle says, okay. Did his exact time. To the second, red light comes on. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to be outside having cigarettes if y'all want to come out and say hi. The entire club, or most of the club, left to go outside to hang out with Dave Chappelle right before Dane Cook was set to come on stage for his headlining gig. That is, first of all, that is offensive. You want to talk about offensive? That is disrespectful. Just disrespectful. I don't give a fuck about you, Dane Cook. Just because he was told not to, it was just such contrary, rebellious behavior. In the whole place, do you want to watch Dane Cook, or do you want to go hang out with Dave Chappelle outside who's smoking cigarettes and shooting the shit and probably doing bits out there? Destroyed him. Many have said that destroyed Dane Cook. That like he had reached the limit at that point. And Dave was like, nope. Anyway, I know he gets into a lot of trouble. He speaks his mind. He says what he wants. And good luck stopping the Dave Chappelle train. So last but not least, this is my number one. I've said it on the show before. It's just a sensibility. It's a type of humor. I don't even know why, but the very first time I saw his stand-up, long before he had a TV show, it was like a Comedy Central Presents. It was like, I don't know, 2:00 in the morning or something one time, and I'm awake and I see this comic and he just kills. Made me laugh so hard out loud. Like, I love good comedy. I like to laugh, but like my kids will always say, you're not like a ha 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 kind of laugher, you know? I do a lot of like, you know, they call it silent laughing, where I'm just like, you know, this guy's got me busted out loud. He talks about being goes to strip clubs with change. Goes, make it rain. I'm going to make it hail because I got coins because I'm a baller on a budget, bitch. And it was just the stupidest thing. Made me laugh so loud. Like, I still say that. I'm going to make it hail. I'm a baller on a budget. Bitch. It's ridiculous. But I'm talking about 1975's Daniel Tosh. I have to tell you, you know, he did Tosh.0, which is basically like the Soup, except 10 times more subversive than a Hal Sparks or a Craig Kilborn or a, you know, Greg Kinnear. I mean, he went places you wouldn't have expected on cable, even on cable, honestly, but like basic cable on Comedy Central. But I had the opportunity. My kid sister took me to see Tosh for my birthday. So we started out at this little sushi joint, and then we made our way to I think it was at the Wang Theater. And first of all, you know, artists get to pick the music that they have. He had Yellow Wolf on the starting music. Anyway, so we're in Boston, Mass, like Boston proper, in the city. And this is right around the time that the Patriots were in the news for a rather negative situation. He bounds out on stage in a Aaron Hernandez jersey. Now, anyone who doesn't know who Aaron Hernandez is, or was, a former tight end for the championship New England Patriots, who was convicted of murder and committed suicide in prison. But this time he was just in prison. The murder was still fresh. You know, I think he was just convicted or whatever it was. And he comes out wearing this jersey. And there's booze. He's like, and if anyone is like actually offended right now, you better buckle up. It is going to be a long night for you. Like, that's how he started, antagonizing the crowd. Immediately, I'm like, this is awesome. But he said something during the set, and it might have had a moment where someone in the crowd was like, woo, right? And that's what he'll do back at him. Woo. Oh, you think that's offensive? And then he'll double down and do something 10 times more offensive. But he said there's people who have said that there's certain things that you can't joke about. And he goes, and as far as I'm concerned, if you think there's things that we can't joke about, we can't be friends. And, I'm there with my wife, my sister, and her boyfriend at the time, husband now. And we all laughed and looked at each other like, yeah, like that's it. Like, you have to be able to laugh. Now, again, I talked about there are some third rails in life. I'm not going to get into what they are, but certain things that my wife and I feel particularly passionate about, right? And he made jokes that touched upon all these things that I could say would be touchy subjects. And my wife, who I'm not saying she's less funny than me, I'm just saying that is more sensitive to certain things than I am, is howling with laughter. Because if you go into it knowing that you're going to probably be faced with something offensive before you go in the doors, and you're willing to accept that, you're going to have a really good time. Honestly. And yeah, I mean, he talked about a lot of things that, I wouldn't consider, certainly not in line with my faith, my morals, and my values, but man, it's funny as shit. And that's kind of like my view on things, right? Like, nothing's off limits. You know what I mean? And Daniel Tosh has been in like real trouble for jokes that I get why the person or persons, I understand why they were offended. But I also look at it from the context of time and place. You're at a comedy club and, you're going to get offended. Like, that's just how it is. But yeah, Daniel Tosh, I think he's just top notch, and he's like not even doing anything right now. Like, once the show ended, I don't think he's done anything on social media. Like, I think he has like a clothing brand or something, but no one's really heard anything from him. But other comics, they know how good he is, but he's almost like this semi-mythical creature at this point because of how low profile he is. But of the comics that I've seen live, he's not the best that I've seen live. So outside of Gen X, the best show I ever saw, like stand-up show, was Eddie Izzard at the Boston Garden, the TD Garden. He just killed for 2 hours or whatever it was. And anyone knows Eddie Izzard, like, he's in a different place in life now, and I don't think he's doing any stand-up. He's been more involved with politics and things like that. But his shows are always based upon, like, history, like really deep dives into history, but also mixing it in with, like, pop culture and, like, Star Wars. And it'd be Star Wars 1 minute, World War II the next. Multilinguist, like, crazy good. His Dress to Kill show, like, you can get it on DVD or on streaming, is still to this day one of the greatest recorded comedy sets ever. Yeah, just killer. And then someone that, again, my wife and I, we bought tickets for. I spent money on this person, which is why I think that nowadays are kind of a downer. Took the thing too serious is what it comes down to. Trying to be overtly cerebral, but also trying not to offend anyone. But Janine Garofalo in like 99, 2000, probably like 2000 and when did we go? Probably 01, I want to say. Killed. Absolutely killed. I forget what that was. It was a club that we didn't normally go to. But yeah, she was so good. But I've seen stuff that she's done since then. It's just not that funny. Really not that funny. I've never found guys who are also Gen X, I never really found Louis C.K. to be super funny. So regardless of whether he's been canceled or not, and he's gradually kind of like, making his way back. Never really found him that funny. I'm not sure if this guy, is he Gen X? He is. Yeah. So, Jim Jeffries, pretty funny. I liked a few of his bits. He also does some, history, but unlike Eddie Izzard, he's in Australia. So Jim Jeffries is in Australia. Eddie Izzard is British. And, World War II from the lens of a Brit who also is fluent in French and a real understanding of like European history and dynamics and kind of juxtaposing that with like the U.S. Whereas Jim Jeffries is, really he's looking at things from a socio like geopolitical perspective, but certainly very Australian, but also a very good stand-up comic. Yeah. So anyway, that's my dive into some of the best Gen X comedians, stand-up comics, if you will. There's some great stuff out there. I like to laugh. And I think we have become super serious. So it's good to know there's like a whole crop of comics out there that are pushing limits and pushing boundaries the way that, your Richard Pryors did, your George Carlins did, your Eddie Murphys. Guys like David Lucas, man, David Lucas makes me laugh. Adam Schultz, Akash, what's Akash's last name? Akash. No, that's not him. Where did he go? Akash. Akash Singh. So Akash Singh, he does the Flagrant podcast with Andrew Schultz. Andrew Schultz, I bought his special. Really, like, so good, so clever, so smart. Really good comedian, and I would wholeheartedly check it out. Another millennial, Eliza Schlesinger, really, really very talented. She did great in Mark Wahlberg's Spencer for Hire. She was his love interest. So good. She's so funny, very talented. But yeah, there's like a lot of good stuff out there. A lot of good comics. Matt Rife, he's very, very good as well. I'm sure you've seen him on numerous clips if you do any social media at all. I didn't mention him, Kevin Hart. His first two comedy specials were really, really good. I think to some extent he's super saturated as like a movie star at this point, but still very good stand-up comic. And I know he still puts in the work and does do stand-up comedy, but a lot of good stuff out there. So who are your favorites comics? Who are your favorite comics of all time? And who from our generation, maybe I missed, someone I'm forgetting, someone I'm leaving out, someone who deserves a little bit more credit than maybe I've given them? Do you think that comedy should be a safe haven? What I mean by that is that go for it. Make the jokes. They might be offensive, but it's putting that lens against society and kind of saying, can you laugh at this? Should you laugh at this? And I just want to say that the more that we can laugh at each other and with each other, and most importantly, like legitimately at ourselves, not take ourselves so seriously, I think would make the world a better place. So let me know. How do you do that? You can email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. You can find me on Instagram, X, and YouTube at StuckPodX. Head on over to the Facebook page, Stuck in the Middle, a Gen X podcast. Please like, comment, share, leave 5-star reviews, and most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast. So until next time, later, slackers. So